There's an entry in my ledger I never filled in. I left it blank for 11 years. One line, no number beside it, because I never learned how to set a price on the thing I owed. Every other debt in that book I've squared, $1 here, a sack of cornmeal there, a day's labor traded for a mended stretch of fence. I balance my accounts. It's about the only thing my father taught me that ever took root. But that blank line kept me up nights. Then one gray, bitter morning, half froze, half starved, moving like the desert itself had decided to give something back, she came walking out of the mesquite toward my water. She didn't want much, a drink, to live long enough to see another sundown. She had no idea she'd walked onto the one patch of ground in the whole territory, where a man had spent 11 years waiting for the chance to pay what he owed her people. I'd been praying for that morning, without ever knowing her face. I'm going to tell you what it cost, both of us, every dollar of it. Stay with me, this one I owe you the whole way through. The first thing I noticed was that the ice on the stock tank was broken wrong. I knew my own tank the way a man knows the sound of his own name. Every morning that winter I'd walked out before light with the axe over my shoulder to break the crust so the cattle could drink. And every morning the ice broke in the same tired place, a ragged white mouth I'd been opening and reopening since November. That's where the axe had taught the ice to give. But this morning the crust was broken in the far corner where I never swung, broken small, broken careful, a hole no bigger than a supper plate, and around its edge in the frost the print of a hand. Not a big hand, not a man's. I stood there in the dark with my breath smoking, and my heart doing a thing hearts aren't supposed to do at 51, and I counted. That's a habit of mine, always has been. When I don't know what to do, I count. Fence posts, cartridges, the beats between a distant shot and its echo. I counted the fingers in that frost print. 5. Slender. The little finger crooked at the last knuckle like it had been broke once and set by somebody who didn't much care how it healed. Then I heard her breathing. She was down in the lee of the tank's stone base, wedged into the one place the wind couldn't reach, folded up small the way animals fold when they've decided dying is a kind of rest. An Apache woman, younger than I'd have guessed from the ruin of her. She had a man's wool coat 2 sizes too big, gone black at the hem with old blood, and her feet were wrapped in strips of hide and calico that had frozen stiff as horn. Her lips were the color of a bruise, and her eyes were open. That's the thing I keep coming back to all these years on. Her eyes were open, and they were looking right at me, and there was no begging in them. None. A person at the bottom of their strength, staring up at an armed stranger, and what I saw in her face was not please. What I saw was, go on then. Let's see what kind of man you are. I have thought about that look a great many times. I have not always liked what it showed me. Now, before I go on, you ought to know who was doing the looking, so you'll understand why my hands weren't steady. My name is Elias Renner, Eli. I ran a middling outfit of cattle in the Sulphur Springs Valley in the shadow of the Dragoon Mountains in the years I'm telling you about. It was hard country, and it did not love anybody, and the only soul it had ever loved through me was my wife, Marta, and she was 3 years in the ground up on the little rise behind the house by the time this happened. I still talk to her most days. I'm not ashamed to say it. A man alone in that much silence either talks to his dead, or he loses the sound of his own voice entirely, and I wasn't ready to let go of mine. I kept a ledger. Everybody out there kept some kind of book, cattle counts, brands, debts to the mercantile in town, but mine was different, and I never let another living person read it. In the front, yes, I kept the ordinary sums, but in the back, on the pages I'd sewn in myself, I kept a different set of accounts. Debts that couldn't be paid in coin, things I owed, things owed to me. A man who'd loaned me his mule in a bad spring, settled, 3 lines, the day I split him a cord of oak. A drifter who'd stolen my good rope, I wrote him down too, though I never once tried to collect. Writing it was enough. It made the world a place where things could be squared. And on one page near the back, there was a single blank line with no number beside it, and above it, in a younger and steadier hand than I've got now, I'd written 3 words. The old man. I'll come to him. Not yet. That debt is the whole reason for everything that follows, and if I hand it to you too quick, you won't feel the weight of it. Just carry this much for now. 11 years before that frozen morning, I should have died in the desert, and I didn't, and the reason I didn't was an Apache I never got to thank. And I had promised God, I am not a praying man, understand, but I promised him anyway out loud in the worst kind of despair, that if he ever set the chance in front of me to pay that debt back to any of that woman's people, I would pay it, whatever it cost. I would not look away twice. So you can see the fix I was in, standing over her at the tank. Because I had also, in the years between, looked away. Once. And the looking away is the other half of what I owed, and it is the half I have never told a soul until now. She tried to stand. That's the part that undid me. She got one frozen foot under herself and pushed, and I watched every muscle in her face agree not to make a sound, and she got maybe 6 inches up the stone before her leg buckled and she went down again with a small grunt punched out of her. And on the way down her hand went, not to catch herself. Her hand went inside the big coat to her hip, where a person keeps a knife. She wasn't reaching to beg. She was getting ready to fight a man twice her weight with whatever she had left, which was next to nothing, which was a broken little blade and a look. Don't, I said, fool thing to say. She didn't have my language and I had maybe 4 words of hers, none of them the right ones. I put my rifle down, set it flat on the frozen ground where she could see me do it, and stepped back from it, and held both my empty hands out where the coming light could catch them. Her eyes went to the rifle, to my hands, to the rifle, doing sums of her own. And that's when I saw the tracks. Out past the tank, coming down out of the pass from the north, cut clean into the frost, shod horses. 3, maybe 4, moving at a walk but not a wandering one, moving the way men move when they're following something and mean to catch it before the day gets old. I knew whose they'd be. There was only one kind of man who'd be up in that pass before dawn in weather like that, and it wasn't a rancher, and it wasn't the army neither. The army was cruel in its own paperwork way, but the army came in daylight and made you sign things. No, tracks like that this early on the trail of a lone woman, that was bounty. That was Rufus Kell. I'll tell you about Kell too, and I'll try to do it without spitting. There was money in those years. You may not want to believe this, but it is history. You can look at the paper it was written on, money paid by more than one government for the scalp of an Apache. Man, woman, or child. They did not draw the line as fine as you'd hope. Kell was a man who collected it. He rode the border and the passes and the dry washes with 2 or 3 others as bad as himself, and he did not much care whether the person under his knife had done anything to anybody. A scalp was a scalp. A long braid of black hair was worth the same at the counting house, whether it came off a warrior or a girl who'd only ever wanted to be left alone to grind corn. That was what was walking down out of the pass toward my water. And there at my feet was the reason they were coming. I want you to sit in that minute with me, because it's the minute the whole rest of my life turned on, and I didn't get it right by being brave. I got it right, if I got it right at all, by being a coward who'd finally found something he was more afraid of than dying. Here were my choices, and I saw them all in the time it takes ice to crack. I could stand aside, let Kell come. Nobody in the territory would say a word against me. Half of them would have shaken my hand. My debt to the old man, well, I could tell myself I'd never promised to die over it. I could keep my land, my cattle, my quiet, my wife's grave, my whole small, ruined, peaceful life. All I had to do was be the man I'd been the last time. All I had to do was look away. Or I could do the other thing. The thing that had no bottom to it. Take her in, hide her, lie to armed men, and step off the edge of the safe world into whatever was down there. I looked at her. She'd got the knife out. held it low along her forearm, the way somebody who actually knows how to use one holds it, not the way you'd hold it in a bad play. Her hand was shaking so hard the frost was falling off the blade. She could not have fought a house cat. And she held it anyway, and she watched me, and she was not going to spend her last strength on hoping I was kind. She was going to spend it making me earn her. Marta used to say I couldn't walk past a hurt thing to save my soul. Said it like a complaint. Said it the morning I brought the three-legged dog in out of the storm, and she pretended to be angry and then fed it off her own plate. "All right," I said out loud to Marta, to God, to the blank line in the back of my book. "All right." And I bent down slow as I knew how, and I did the only thing I could think of to make her believe me. I didn't reach for her. I picked up her frozen calico foot wrappings that had come loose in the snow, and I held them out to her, offering like you'd offer a spooked horse the thing it dropped. She looked at the wrappings. She looked at me. And something in her face, I won't call it trust, it was too hard and too tired to be trust, something decided. She let the point of the knife drop an inch. Just an inch. It was the largest thing anybody had given me in 3 years. Then she said something low and cracked in her own tongue and jerked her chin not at herself, past me, back the way I'd come, toward the house. She was telling me to hurry. Getting her the 200 yards to the house is a thing I remember in pieces, the way you remember a fever. She couldn't walk. Her right leg, the source of all that black blood on the coat, wouldn't hold her, and when I got a look at it later I understood why. But right then all I knew was that I had to carry a grown woman who did not want to be carried across open frozen ground while shod horses came down a pass a mile off. I got her arm over my shoulders. She was lighter than she had any right to be, light as a bundle of kindling, and that lightness told a longer story of hunger than any words could have. She smelled of wood smoke and old blood and something underneath, sage maybe, crushed sage, a green sharp smell that didn't belong to winter. She hissed with every step, bit it back, hissed again. And once, when I stumbled in a badger hole and jarred the leg and she near passed out from it, she grabbed a fistful of my coat and held on and did not cry out, and I felt her whole body shaking against my side with the work of not crying out. And I thought, I have known grown men, hard men, who could not do what this half-dead woman is doing right now. I did not take her in the house. I want to be honest about my cowardice even here. I thought about it. The house was warm and there was a bed. But a house is the first place men search, and if Kel walked in and found her in Marta's bed I'd hang and she'd die worse, so I took her instead to the root cellar out back, a low stone room dug into the rise, cool in summer and merely cold in winter, where I kept the potatoes and turnips and the barrel of last fall's apples going soft. It had a plank door you could pull a bench over. It smelled of earth and apples and mice. It was the safest wrong place I had. I got her down the steps, got her onto the pile of feed sacks in the corner and the 2 horse blankets I ran and fetched, and I built no fire because a fire means smoke and smoke means a chimney where there ought not be one. I gave her the heel of yesterday's bread and a strip of dried beef and the last of the morning's coffee still warm in the pot, and I watched her make herself eat slow, deliberately slow, rationing it, a person who had learned the hard mathematics of a shrunk stomach. Her eyes never left the door. I had maybe minutes. I knew it. I went a go and her hand shot out and caught my wrist quick, that hand, quicker than the rest of her ruined body and cold as the tank. She looked up at me, and she said the same word twice, slow, teaching it to me, tapping her own chest with her free hand. I didn't understand the word. I understood the tapping. I understood she was telling me she was a person, in case I'd forgotten, in case it would make a difference. "Eli," I said, tapping my own chest. Fool that I am. My voice cracked on the one syllable of my own name. She almost did something with her mouth that on a better day might have grown up to be a smile. Then a horse whickered, far off but not far enough, and the almost smile died, and she let go of my wrist and pushed me toward the door with a strength that surprised me. Urgent. Go, go. And I pulled the plank door shut on her and dragged the bench across it, and prayed the apples would cover the smell of blood. Rufus Kell rode into my yard as the sun cleared the dragoons. There were 4 of them. Kell in front on a rawboned dun, wrapped in a buffalo coat gone shiny with grease, with a face like something left too long in the sun, burnt and cracked and lidded, eyes pale as skimmed milk. Behind him, 3 men I half knew by reputation and didn't want to know better. And tied to Kell's saddle, swinging, were things I made myself not look at directly, because if I looked I'd have done something that got us both killed inside a minute. I was splitting wood when they came. I'd made sure of it, grabbed the axe and set to it the second I heard them, so they'd find a man at his ordinary chores and not a man just come running from a cellar. My hands remembered how to split wood while the rest of me stood off to one side and watched cold from a long way away. That's a mercy the body does for you in a bad hour. It keeps working. Renner, Kell said. He knew my name. That was its own small horror. Kell. I set the axe head down and leaned on the handle. Easy, a man with all the time in the world. Long way up from the border. Cold morning for it. Cold morning for everybody. He looked around my yard slow, at the house, at the barn, at the smoke coming honest out of my kitchen chimney and nowhere else. His pale eyes went over everything and I made myself keep breathing regular in, out, counting it. 1, 2. You seen anybody? Seen you? I let a beat go by. Before that, seen a coyote out by the wash, big one, that the fella you're after. One of the men behind him laughed, short, and Kell didn't. And that told me which one of them thought and which ones just followed. Squaw, Kell said. He said it the way you'd name a thing, not a person, and I felt the word go into me like a splinter and I made my face do nothing at all. Come out of San Carlos 10 days back, wounded. Been tracking her 4 days. Lost her sign in the rocks up the pass last night. He leaned down over his saddle horn, and the buffalo coat creaked, and up close he smelled of sweat and old grease and something Swedish and rotten I've spent 30 years trying to forget. Her tracks come down this valley, Renner. Down toward water. Man's got the only water for 6 mile. That man tends to know when something been drinking at it. And there it was. The whole thing balanced on the point of a lie. I have never been a good liar. Marta said my ears went red. But I have found that a man can lie clean if he's got something true to hang it on, and I did. Something broke my ice this morning, I said, which was God's own truth. Found it broke in the far corner, thought it was that coyote. I shook my head slow, disgusted, a rancher put out by vermin. You want to earn your money, Kell, go on and follow that. Tracks head south down the wash toward the Turnbull place. Coyote or your squaw, whatever it was, it went south. Weren't but the one set of prints and they went south. Now that last was the lie. Her prints hadn't gone anywhere. I'd carried her north to my own cellar not an hour past. But I'd scuffed the ground by the tank on my way to the woodpile, drug my boots through the frost around that supper plate hole till a print was a smear, and I'd left one clean coyote track I'd found real and pointed it south with the toe of my boot like a signpost. It was the best I'd had time for. It was probably not good enough. My ears, I am certain, were the color of the meat on Kell's saddle. Kell looked at me a long, long time. The sun was full up now, and it lit his pale eyes, and I could not read one thing in them. Behind me, 200 yards and a wall of earth away, a half-dead woman was lying in the dark with a broken knife, listening to the murmur of the men who wanted her hair, and I stood in my own yard leaning on an axe and I counted my own heartbeats so I wouldn't run. 11, 12, 13. Turnbull Place, Kell said at last, flat giving nothing. South down the wash, I said. Follow the low ground, you'll cut sign again where it gets sandy. He straightened up in the saddle. He looked once more at my house, my barn, my honest single thread of chimney smoke, and I understood in that stretched-out second that he did not believe me, not all the way. Rufus Kell had lived as long as he had by not believing men, and he did not start with me, but belief wasn't what he traded in. Time was. Every hour on a cold trail was an hour a wounded woman got weaker, and a scalp got easier. And chasing a rancher's maybe-lie meant tearing up a homestead, meaning trouble, meaning talk, meaning time, and south down a sandy wash, there was a fresh coyote track pointing his way like an answered prayer. He chose the easy road. Cruel men so often do. It's the one grace God built into their cruelty. "Obliged," Kell said, in a voice that meant the opposite, and he reined the dun around, and the four of them went out of my yard at a trot south, down toward the wash, dragging their terrible cargo behind them. And I stood and watched them get small, and I did not move, and I did not breathe right, and I did not put down the axe until the last of them was gone behind the roll of the land. Then my legs quit, and I sat down hard in the wood chips and shook. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to warm the back of my neck. Long enough to hear a meadowlark start up somewhere, stupid and ordinary like it was any other morning. Long enough for the shaking to work itself out through my hands. When I could stand, I went back to the cellar. I dragged the bench off slow, and I opened the plank door slow, and I said Eli through the crack before I showed my face, because I did not want to be a shape looming in her doorway again. Inside, in the earth dark, I could just make her out. She'd moved. She dragged herself off the feed sacks into the far corner behind the apple barrel, into the deepest black of that room, so that if the door had opened for the wrong man, he'd have had to come all the way in and hunt for her. And she still had the knife. And she was still, after everything, after 4 days run to ground and a leg gone to poison, and men not a mile off swinging the hair of her kin, she was still ready. I have thought since that this is the truest thing I know about her, and about her people, and maybe about the whole business of surviving in a world that has decided you shouldn't. It is this: she never once, in all I knew of her, spent her strength on despair. She hoarded it. She kept it for the fight. Despair is a luxury, and she had never in her life been able to afford it. I held up my 2 empty hands. "They're gone," I said. "South, I sent 'em south." She couldn't understand the words, but she could read a man's face and his hands and his shoulders. She'd been reading exactly that, I'd wager, her whole life, because her whole life had depended on it, and she read mine now, and whatever was written there, she believed it. And she let the knife down. All the way this time, set it in her lap. And the readiness went out of her shoulders like water out of a cracked jug, all at once, and she put her face down in her one clean hand, and her thin shoulders started to shake. And no sound came out. She wouldn't even let herself have the sound. And I understood that I was watching a person come apart in the only private minute she'd been given in 4 days, and that the kindest thing I owned was the ability to pretend I hadn't seen it. So I turned around, faced the door, gave her the wall of my back for a privacy, and I looked out at the ordinary morning, and I let her weep the way a person weeps who has been holding a thing up so long they'd forgotten it had weight. And while I stood there, I did the sum I always do. The old man, 11 years ago in the blank line of my book, that debt was still unpaid. One morning's lie didn't touch it. And the other thing, the looking away I still hadn't told you about, that account was still open too, and it was the deeper red of the two. But there was a new line in the book now, freshly opened, and I could feel the exact shape of it the way you feel weather coming in a bad knee. I had lied to Rufus Kell. Rufus Kell did not, all the way, believe me. And down that sandy wash toward the Turnbull place there was no wounded woman to find, only a coyote track and a cold trail that would run out by noon and turn a suspicious man's mind back the way it came, back up the valley, back toward the only water for 6 miles, and the man who guarded it, and the far corner of an iced-over tank broken careful by a small hand with a crooked little finger. I turned back around. She'd got herself quiet again. She was watching me over the top of the apple barrel with those open, unbegging eyes, and the light from the door caught them, and I saw that whatever came next, she already knew it wasn't over. She knew it before I let myself. "He'll be back," I said to her, to Marta, to the blank line, to nobody. Girl, he's gonna come back. She didn't need the words. She was already reaching for the knife. He leg was trying to kill her, and it was going to do it slower and worse than Kel ever could. I got my first real look at it that second night. By the light of a single candle, I'd finally risked one candle, shielded on three sides by a wall of turnip crates so no glow could find the cracks in the plank door. She'd let me unwrap it. That was its own kind of surrender, and I did not take it lightly, her letting a strange man's hands near the worst of her. She lay back on the feed sacks with her jaw set, and her eyes fixed on the earth ceiling, and she let me peel away the frozen calico and the black stiff hide, layer by layer, down to the wound. I have gutted deer. I have pulled a breech calf in the dark with my whole arm inside a dying cow. I do not spook at blood, but I had to look away from that leg for a second and breathe. It was a bullet, gone in high on the outside of the thigh, and it had not come out, and the flesh around it had gone the colors flesh goes when it's given up, red running to purple running to a green-black at the lips of it, and the heat coming off it you could feel from a foot away, and the smell. I won't describe the smell. Some of you have tended a wound gone bad and you know it, and the rest of you don't need it in your heads. She'd been carrying that for the better part of 2 weeks. Run 4 days on it. Broke ice with a hand that had a broke finger, and hauled her whole poisoned self across a frozen valley on that leg, and never once made a sound a man could track her by. I did the sum because that's what I do. 2 weeks. That ball had been feeding the rot for 2 weeks. In 2 more days, 3 at the outside, the rot would reach past where any water and rag could follow it, and then it would climb, and then there'd be nothing to do but watch. She was watching my face while I did the arithmetic. She always watched my face. My face was the only newspaper she had. And she saw whatever landed there, and she gave a small nod, one small tired nod, like a person confirming a thing they'd already known and only wanted witnessed. She knew, of course she knew, it was her leg. No, I said. Which was a stupid thing to say to a fact. But I said it, and I meant it as a promise, and she heard the promise in it even without the word, and she closed her eyes. Here is where I have to tell you about the old man, because I could not have done what I did next without him, and because you have been patient, and because the two of them, the old man 11 years gone and the woman bleeding in my cellar, had by that night begun to blur together in my mind in a way I couldn't stop and didn't want to. 11 years before, I was a younger and stupider man, and I got myself lost. That's the whole shameful heart of it. I was 2 years married, hadn't yet learned the country, and I went out after a bunch of strayed cattle in the dry months, and I let my pride carry me further into the Chiricahua foothills than sense allowed, and a sandstorm came up out of the south and turned the world to stinging brown nothing, and when it cleared, I did not know one rock from another, and my canteen was dry, and my horse had bolted. 3 days I walked. I want you to understand what 3 days without water in that country is. By the end of the second day, I was seeing Marta walking ahead of me between the Ocotillo. By the middle of the third I had stopped sweating, which is the body's last economy before it quits, and I had sat down in the shade of a boulder to die, and I had made my peace with it the way you do, not bravely, just tiredly. I remember being mostly sorry about the trouble it would put Marta to. And an old Apache man came and stood over me. I thought he was another thing my dying brain had cooked up, like the visions of my wife. He was old, truly old, his face a dry riverbed of lines, his hair more gray than black, tied back with a strip of red cloth. He carried a water skin and a short bow and nothing else I could see, and by every rule of that time and that place, he had no reason on this earth to help me. My people were killing his. There was money on his head, the same filthy money Kel chased. If he'd walked on and left me to the boulder, God himself would have called it fair. He knelt down. He put the mouth of the water skin to my cracked lips, and he gave me water in small amounts, the right way, a swallow and a wait and a swallow, the way you water a man who will kill himself gulping. He did not speak my language, and I did not speak his. When I could sit up, he studied me a while with black eyes that had seen more than I'd ever see, and then he did a thing I have turned over 10,000 times since. He laughed. Not cruel. A short dry chuckle, shaking his head, like the whole business, the lost fool white man, the water, the strangeness of the two of them meeting at the bottom of the world, was a joke God had told and only he'd caught the point of. Then he got me on my feet, walked me half a day to a seep only he knew in a cleft in the rock, cool water you'd never find in 100 years of looking, filled my canteen. And then he pointed north and put his hand flat on my chest once. The same gesture, I realized 11 years later in a cold cellar. The exact same gesture she'd made, tapping her own chest, I am a person, and he turned and walked back into the country and I never saw him again. I found my way home in 2 days on the water he gave me. Marta had her hair half gray by the time I came up the track. She'd aged years in 5 days. And I sat down that first night and I opened the back of my ledger, and I wrote the old man and I drew a line for what I owed him, and I left the amount blank, because how do you put a number on your whole remaining life? I told myself I'd find him, repay him somehow. I never did. And there was a reason I stopped looking, a bad reason, the looking away I keep circling and not landing on, but that comes later, and it belongs to part of this I'm not ready to hand you yet. And you'll forgive an old man for hoarding his one confession till the end. For now, only this. I had prayed, kneeling by Marta's fresh grave 3 years back, emptied out and furious at a God who'd take her. I had said out loud, if you ever put one of his people in front of me needing what he gave me, I will pay it, and you can take whatever it costs me. I don't want it anyhow. And now there was a woman dying in my potato cellar. And when I closed my eyes, I could not tell the old man's face from hers. You tell me that's coincidence. I've stopped arguing. I dug the bullet out on the 3rd morning. I'll not walk you through all of it. Some things a man does and does not narrate. I boiled my knife and the fine-nosed pliers I used for wire, and I made a paste of the things Marta had kept in her medicine box that I half remembered the use of, and I chewed a wad of the wild tobacco, and the yarrow I dug from under the snow, because I'd seen an old Mexican vaquero pack a wound with such once and swear by it. I had a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for no reason since the funeral. I gave her the first long pull of it and took none myself, because I needed my hands. She would not be tied. I mimed it, the ropes, so she'd not thrash and tear herself worse, and she looked at the ropes and looked at me and shook her head once, hard. And I understood that being bound was a thing that had happened to her before, at other hands, and that she would rather I dug lead out of her living leg unbound than feel a rope on her wrists one more time in her life. So I didn't. I gave her a smooth stick of oak to bite instead, and she took it, and she braced her own 2 hands flat against the stone wall behind her, and she nodded me to start. She made no sound. I want that written down plain. My knife went into that ruined leg hunting a ball buried 2 weeks deep, and her whole body went rigid as an anvil, and the sweat sprang out on her gray face and ran into her hair, and the only sound in that cellar was my own breathing and the small wet work of the knife, and once the oak stick creaking as her jaw bore down, but from her throat nothing. She had somewhere she went. I've seen it since in Old Soldiers. A room inside where the pain can't follow, and she'd built hers young and lived in it often, and she went there now and left her body to me to fix. When the pliers finally closed on the ball and I drew it out, flattened, ugly, trailing corruption, she let out one breath through her nose, long and shaking, and spat out the stick, and looked at the bit of metal in my bloody fingers with an expression I can only call contempt, like it was a small enemy that had finally been made to answer. Then she lay back and let me pack the wound and bind it clean, and by the time I was done her eyes had rolled half shut, and she'd gone somewhere past the pain room into plain sleep, the first real sleep I'd seen her take. I sat with her a long while in the candlelight. I counted her breaths till they came even. And somewhere in there, without deciding to, I reached out and moved a strand of sweat-stuck hair off her face, the way I used to for Marta in a fever, and caught myself, and took my hand back, ashamed of the tenderness like it was a trespass. She wasn't Marta. She wasn't a thing for me to feel gentle over so I could feel good about myself. She was a whole person with a whole life I knew nothing of, who'd have grabbed her knife if she'd woke to my hand on her face. I knew that. I put my hand in my lap and I kept it there and I just watched over her, which was the only tenderness I had a right to. The fever broke on the 5th day, and on the 6th she gave me a name. Not her name, I understood that later and understand it still, and I've never held it against her. What she gave me was a name, a using name, a thing to call her by that cost her nothing true. She was sitting up by then, propped on the sacks, the color come back into her face enough that I could see she was younger even than I'd thought, and stronger under the ruin than the ruin let on. She'd eaten a whole bowl of the venison broth I'd been spooning into her and kept it down. And she looked at me a while, weighing something, and then she touched her own chest and said a word, clear, twice. It sounded to my clumsy ear like Nolan. I'll spell it that way, I never learned better. I said it back badly and she winced at what I did to it, and then did the mouth thing again, the almost smile that had almost happened at the tank, and this time she let it finish. It wasn't much of a smile. Half of it was still braced for a blow. But it was a real one, and it changed her whole face, and I had to look down at the broth pot for a second, because it did something to my chest I wasn't ready for. "Eli," I said, tapping myself, like it was the first time because starting over felt right. "Eli," she said. And then, and I'll never forget this, she pointed one finger up at the plank door, at the world outside it where Kel rode, and she drew that same finger slow across her own throat and raised her eyebrows at me. A question. The bad man. Is he still out there? I couldn't lie to that face. I'd lied to Kel easy enough. I couldn't lie to her. I nodded, yes, still out there. She took that in, nodded back unsurprised, a soldier receiving a report. And then she did the thing that told me the most about the country she came from. She gestured at her healing leg, and at the door, and made a walking motion with 2 fingers and looked at me hard. "When I can walk," I go, "I bring no more danger to your door." She was 6 days off her own deathbed, already planning to leave so that I wouldn't hang for her. I shook my head, pointed at the leg, held up my hands, "Not yet, not till it's whole." She frowned. We were, I understood, about to have our first argument, a whole disagreement conducted in gestures by candlelight between 2 people with no shared word, and it was about which of us was allowed to bear the risk of the other, and I tell you I have had worse arguments with people I shared a language with. I won that one. Or she let me win it, seeing the leg wouldn't yet carry her a mile. But she made me understand, jabbing that finger at the ground at now, that the debt of it ran the other way in her book, that she was the one beholden, and that an unpaid debt sat on her the way it sat on me, and I thought, there it is. She keeps the same kind of ledger. Different letters, same arithmetic. We are not so far apart as the whole world has spent its money insisting. That was the 6th day. It was, I think now, the last easy one we got. Because on the 7th day I had to go to town, and everything after turns on it. The wound was clean, but it needed more than I had. The yarrow and tobacco had done their work, but the flesh wanted proper drawing, and the fever might come again, and I had no laudanum and near no food fit for a healing body, and I'd burned through Marta's medicine box down to the empty tins. I could keep her alive on venison and prayer for maybe a few more days. To get her whole, walking, able to run if it came to running, I needed supplies, and the only supplies in 40 miles were in the town of Wilcox, and to Wilcox I would have to go. I did not want to leave her. I want that understood. Leaving her alone in that cellar, half-healed, with Kel somewhere in the country, it was the hardest reckoning of the whole business up to then. If Kel came while I was gone, she'd have a broken knife and a bad leg and no one to send him south. But if I didn't go, the leg might turn again, and then all the rest was for nothing. I laid it out for her the best I could in signs. The town, the medicine, my going and coming back. I held up fingers for the hours, and I saw her weigh it, saw her understand the risk of my going and the risk of my staying, do the same brutal sum I'd done, and she nodded me toward the door. Go, it's the right trade. Then she reached under the feed sacks and drew out that broken little knife and held it up and gave me a look flat as a closed door. I am not helpless. Go do the thing that needs doing. I left her the whiskey, the last of the bread, a full water jug, and my old belt knife, a real one, laid where her hand could reach. And I saw her eyes go to it and then to me, and she understood what the loan of a good blade meant from a man like me, and she didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. I dragged the crates back over the door from inside so it'd look untouched from without, squeezed out the low gap, stacked wood across it careless looking, and I rode for Wilcox with my heart in my boots. Wilcox told me two things, and I liked neither. The first I got from Amos Tuttle at the Mercantile, who talked the way a leaky trough runs, without being asked. I bought my laudanum and my carbolic and my flour and my dried apples and salt pork, ordinary as any rancher laying in, and Amos wrapped it and talked. And in the talking he said Rufus Kell had been through town 2 days back. Ugly-tempered, Amos said. His trail down some wash had run out to nothing, and he'd lost days on it and lost money, and he was of a mind that somebody had lied to him. Word was he doubled back up the valley to work it slow, homestead by homestead. Word was, Amos said, lowering his voice all delighted with the drama of it, that Kell had taken to saying a certain Nestor was going to answer some questions. Amos didn't know the Nestor was me. He'd have sold me out cheerful as anything if he had. He was just passing the day. I paid, and I kept my face a rancher's bored face, and my ears, I'm sure of it, went the color of the salt pork. The second thing I got outside, loading my mule from a knot of men by the corral. A new notice had gone up. I'll not dignify it by calling it a law, but there was fresh money now, the men were saying, and not only for the old scalp price on a pash off the reservation, there was money now, and army paper besides, for any white man found to be harboring or aiding a hostile. Fine, or prison. Or worse out here, where paper was slow and rope was fast, and a man harboring an Apache in the year I'm telling you about might not live to see a courtroom. So there it was, laid out in the cold sun of the Wilcox corral. My arithmetic had gotten simpler and much worse. It was no longer her neck against my conscience. It was her neck and mine both, in the same noose, and Rufus Kell coming slow up the valley with a grudge and a nose for lies, and the whole weight of the law's blessing on his side now, and me the only water for 6 miles. I got on my horse, and I rode home faster than was safe. I knew before I topped the rise. I think I knew from the crows. There were crows up off the yard, wheeling and complaining the way they do when something stirred them off a thing, and I came up the last of the track at a dead run, with the laudanum bottles clinking in the saddlebag, and one hand already going for the carbine, and I crested the rise above my own home place in the last gray light of that 7th day. And there were horses in my yard. Not 4. I counted, because I always count, and the counting is the last clear thing before the part of the story I haven't got the stomach to tell you tonight. I counted the horses tied at my own rail in the dusk, and there were 3, and none of them was Kell's rawbone done. And that was somehow worse, because it meant I did not know these men, and I did not know what they'd found, and between me and my barred cellar door there was a lit lamp burning in my kitchen window that I had left dark. Somebody was in my house. And the wood I'd stacked so careful across the low gap of the cellar, I could see it even from the rise, even in that light, because I'd spent 7 days learning to see that door the way I saw nothing else on this earth. The wood was pulled down. I left my horse below the rise, and I went up the last of it on my belly through the frozen grass like a thief on his own land. 3 horses at my rail, a lamp burning in a kitchen where I'd left no flame, the cellar wood pulled down and scattered. I lay there with the cold coming up through my coat, and I counted 3 horses, 1 door open, 1 lit window, and I made my hands stop shaking by the old trick of giving them a job, working a cartridge into the carbine slow so the lever wouldn't sing. Then I heard it, thin through the cold air, from inside my own house. Her voice, not screaming, talking, fast and low and alive in her own tongue, that cracked voice I'd learned across 7 days, going and going, and then a man's voice answering it, deep, careful, in the same tongue. And I lay there in the grass with my heart slamming, and I understood two things at once. The way you understand a whole landscape when the lightning shows it. These were not Kel's men. Kel's men would not be conversing with her. And she was not tied, not fighting, not afraid. She was arguing. She was, God help me, arguing with them the same stubborn way she'd argued with me by candlelight about who was allowed to bear the risk. They were her people. They had come for her. I should have felt relief. I felt the bottom go out of my stomach, because I did not know how this went. A white man crawling up on 3-armed Apache in the dark, in a year when white men shot Apache for the coin in their hair, and Apache had 100 fresh reasons to shoot any white man who came up on them out of the grass. I could get us all killed just by standing up wrong. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stood up in plain view, 30 yards off, in the last of the light where they could see me, and I set the carbine down flat on the ground, and I stepped off of it, and I raised my 2 empty hands over my head, the same as I'd done at the tank on the first morning of all this. The door of my house came open. A man stepped out onto my own porch with a rifle already up and level on my chest, and behind him another, and I stood there with my arms up and my breath smoking, and I waited to find out if 7 days had bought me anything at all. Then Nolan's voice, sharp from inside, one word, hard as a slap. The rifle did not lower, but it did not fire. And that was the whole of my life, balanced on it in the cold. There were 3 of them, like the horses. 2 men, and I saw when they let me come down off the rise and into the lamplight, a woman near Nolan's age with a baby bound to her back, the baby asleep through all of it, which told me these were people who had learned to travel quiet with children, which told me more than I wanted to know about the years they'd had. The younger man kept his rifle on me the whole time, and I did not blame him 1 inch. The older man, broad, gray coming in at his temples, a long scar seaming one cheek, did the looking. He looked at me the way I'd once seen the old man look at me 11 years gone, black eyes going over every part of me doing sums of their own, and then he said, in slow border Spanish, rough but plenty good enough. She says you cut the bullet from her. She says you sent the scout man south. My Spanish was the Catalan mercantile kind, but it held. She, I said, both. His name is Kel. He came back. He's up the valley now working the homesteads. He thinks I lied to him. I made myself hold the man's black eyes. He's right. I did. Something moved in the scarred man's face. He turned and said a few words to the others, and the younger man's rifle came down at last. Not all the way, but down. And I let my arms come to my sides and felt the blood go back into them like fire. Nolan was on her feet. She shouldn't have been the leg, God, the leg, but she was up, braced against my own kitchen table with one hand, and she was looking at me across the lamplight, and there was a whole argument still live in her face. I understood it without the scarred man having to say it. Her people wanted to move her now, tonight, poison leg or no, get her up and out and gone across the country before Kel cut their sign. And she was refusing. She was refusing to be carried out over the body of the risk it left me in. She won't come, the scarred man said, watching me watch her, until she knows what happens to you. A pause, dry, almost the ghost of the old man's dry humor. She is like this. It is a great trouble to everyone who loves her. Everyone who loves her. So there were people in the world who loved her. Of course there were. I don't know why that struck me so, standing there, except that I'd spent 7 days thinking of her as alone as I was, and she wasn't, she never had been. She had a whole world of people who'd tracked her 10 days across killing country to bring her home. I was the one who was alone. I was just the water she'd stopped at. I should have felt smaller for it. I felt instead something come loose in me that I'd been holding shut for 11 years. Because I knew now that I was going to tell them the other thing, the deeper red thing, the confession I'd hoarded from you all this while, that I'd hoarded from my own self, from Marta, from the God I prayed at over her grave. I was going to say it out loud to the one people on earth it belonged to, and let it fall where it fell. Ask her, I said to the scarred man, and my voice did not sound like mine. Ask her if she ever knew an old man, old when I knew him 11 years back, hair going gray, tied with a strip of red cloth. He carried a short bow and a water skin and nothing else. He knew a hidden seep in the Chiricahua rock in a cleft cold water where no one would find it. I had to start again. He found me dying in the desert, a white fool lost 3 days dry. He had every reason to walk on and leave me to it. He gave me water instead, small swallows the right way. He walked me half a day to that seep and filled my canteen and pointed me home. And when he was done, before he left, he laughed. Like it was a joke, only he understood. Then he put his hand flat on my chest once and went back into the country, and I never saw him again. The scarred man had gone very still. He turned to Nalin and he spoke low, and I watched her face as the words reached it, and I watched the words land, and I watched her sink slowly back down onto the bench by my table like her strings had been cut, her hand going to her own chest. Over the place a hand had once been laid, and her eyes came up to me across that lamplit kitchen wide and stricken and full. Her grandfather, the scarred man said quietly. You are speaking of her grandfather. The room tilted. I put a hand on the door frame. He is dead, the scarred man went on, and there was no cruelty in how he said it, only the flatness of a fact carried a long way. 8 years now. Scalp men found the small camp at the seep, the hidden water you speak of, the water only he knew. Someone told them where it was. They came before light. He stopped. His scarred cheek worked. Few of us came out of the rocks. She came out. She was a child. She came out and her grandfather did not. Someone told them where it was. I want you to understand that I already knew. In the half-second between his words, I already knew. The way you know a stair's not there in the dark the instant before your foot finds the empty air. I knew because I had spent 8 years not letting myself count this particular sum, and now it added itself up all at once in front of everyone. So I told them. 3 years after he saved me, I said, and I made myself keep my eyes on hers, on Nolan's, because a coward's confession made to the floor is just one more cowardice. I was in Wilcox. In the mercantile, there were men at the counter. Scalp men, Kell's kind, maybe Kell himself. I've told myself for 8 years I couldn't be sure, and that's a lie too. And they were laughing about a band camped at a water in the Chiricahua rock. A cleft, a hidden seep. And they said there was an old one with them, an old man who wore a strip of red cloth in his hair. Nalin was not breathing. None of them were. I knew him, I said. The second I heard the red cloth, I knew him. I knew the water because he'd shown it to me. It had saved my life. I could have drawn them a map to the wrong place. I could have ridden out myself that same night and warned him. I owed him my whole life, and there was time to pay even a little of it back. My voice was going, but I did not stop it. And I did nothing. I bought my flour and I walked out to my horse, and I rode home to my wife and my land and my safe, quiet life. And I told myself it was not my business, and I did not warn him, and I did not ride out, and I never went looking for him again because I did not want to find out. The lamp hissed. The baby stirred on its mother's back and settled. I looked away, I said. Once I looked away, and your grandfather died at the water where he saved me. That is the debt. That is the real one, not the bullet. The bullet was nothing. I have owed your family my life for 11 years, and I paid it back by helping to bury the man who gave it to me. And then I ran out of words, and there was nothing to do but stand in my own kitchen and let them look at me. I had thought, insofar as I'd let myself think of confessing at all, that they would kill me, or curse me, or that at the least there'd be some terrible clean breaking of the thing that had grown up between Nalin and me over 7 days. I had braced for it the way she'd braced against the wall for my knife. Nobody did any of it. That is the part I most need you to hear, because it is the part I understood least at the time and understand most now. The scarred man translated it all slow, unsparing every word, and Nolan sat and took it the way she'd taken the knife in her leg, silent, upright, going to that room inside herself where the worst things couldn't finish her. And when it was done, she did not scream at me, and she did not weep, and she did not forgive me either. And it is the not forgiving that I have come to be grateful for, because a quick forgiveness would have been a lie, and she did not deal in those. She just looked at me for a long time, and then she said something, not to me, to the scarred man, and he hesitated before he passed it on, and when he did, his rough Spanish was gentler than it had been. She says, he told me, that you have been carrying a dead man on your back for 8 years, and you did not put him down even when it cost you nothing to. She says a man who will not set down a debt he could walk away from clean, he paused, choosing it, is a strange kind of man. She does not know yet if it is a good kind. He looked at me. She says, her grandfather laughed at you in the desert. She has been wondering, all the days in your cold ground room, what he found so funny about a dying white fool. Now she thinks she knows. She thinks he saw this in you, this thing you do with debts, and it made him laugh because it is so much trouble and so rare, and he liked rare, troublesome things. I could not answer that. I have never been able to answer it. 8 years I'd carried the certainty that my silence had killed the old man, and here was his granddaughter telling me that the old man had seen, in the very hour he saved me, exactly the kind of coward and the kind of debtor I'd turn out to be, and had laughed, and saved me anyway. You can make of that what you want. I've made 100 things of it, and I'm not done. The scarred man was already turning away, all business again, because the world had not stopped for my reckoning. Now, he said, the leg, can she ride? And that was when the dog started barking down at the barn, and I heard, faint on the cold air from up the valley, the sound of shod horses coming at a trot in the dark. Kell had found the water after all. There was no time to lay a clever plan, and no clever plan to lay. There was only the country, and I was the one who knew it. He knows this water, I said fast in my broken Spanish already moving, and he'll know these horses aren't mine the second he's close. You can't outrun him on the flat, not with the leg, not with the child. But north of here the land breaks up into the Malpais old lava black rock cut country. A horse that doesn't know it breaks a leg in the dark. I know it. There's a way through to the Galliuros that Kell can't track in one night, and past that you're gone. I looked at the scarred man. I'll take you through. He held my eyes. He understood what I was saying under the words, the same as she'd understood everything under all my words for 7 days, that a man who guided them through the Malpais tonight could not come home in the morning, that Kell would come to an empty homestead, find the cut cellar and the scalp hunter's law on his side, and know that I was offering to leave my land, my cattle, my roof, and the little rise behind the house where Marta was in the ground, and where I'd meant to be buried beside her, offering to leave the one grave I talked to, walk off the edge of my whole rooted life into the dark with people who had every reason to hate me, to pay a debt no ledger could hold. Your wife, the scarred man said. He'd seen the rise then coming in. He'd seen the wooden marker. You will not come back to this place. No, I said, I won't. He looked at me a moment more. Then he nodded once, and it was done, and there was no time to feel it. We moved. God, how those people moved, quiet and fast, and every one of them knowing their job without a word. The woman up on her horse with the child. The young man dousing my lamp and scattering the fire so there'd be no glow to shoot at. The scarred man swinging Nolan up before him on his own horse because her leg would not take a mount of her own. I threw a saddle on my second horse and grabbed the carbine and the water and nothing else. Nothing else. 11 years of a life, and I took a rifle and a water jug and left the rest for Kell to burn. At the last in the black yard, with the shod horses maybe 2 miles off and closing, Nolan caught my sleeve. She'd taken back her broken little knife somewhere. She had it in her hand, and she pressed it at me, hilt first. Her grandfather's knife, I understood without being told. The one she'd held on me at the tank, the one thing she'd carried out of that seep as a child and kept through everything. She pressed it into my hand and closed my fingers over it with both of hers and looked up at me in the dark, and she said something soft in her own tongue that I did not need the scarred man to carry. Then she let go, and we rode into the Malpais. I will not tell you the whole of that night's ride, because some of it was only cold and dark, and the sound of hooves on lava and the fear that thins your blood. But I will tell you the end of it, at the water. There was a seep in the Malpais, near the far edge of the Black Country, in a cleft in the rock, cold water where no one would find it, the kind of hidden water an old man might know. I do not think it was the seep. That was 40 miles south in the Chiricahuas. But it was its brother, its cousin, one of the secret veins of that whole thirsty land, and we stopped there in the gray before dawn to let the horses drink, because the horses had to drink or die. And that was when Kell's men came out of the rocks. He'd cut our sign after all. He'd pushed his horses through country that broke 2 of them. I heard, days later, that he'd lost 2 mounts and a man's collarbone in the Malpais that night. And I have never been sorry, and he'd come out at the only water for miles because a scalp man's whole trade is knowing where the hunted have to stop. There were 3 of them left mounted, Kell and 2, coming up out of the black rock into the gray light with rifles. And here is the thing I have carried longest, the thing that undoes the clean story anybody would want to tell about that night. We did not gun them down. There was no great battle, no righteous slaughter with the wicked man dead in the dust. It was faster and stranger and less than that. The scarred man and the young man were already off their horses and into the rocks before Kell's men cleared the far side. They knew that water was a trap and had set themselves the instant we stopped, the way people set themselves who have lived their whole lives one bad dawn away from this. When Kell's men came up, they came up into 2 rifles they could not see and one they could mine, standing in the open by the horses, which I had not planned but which turned out to be the whole of it. Because Rufus Kell, coming out of the rock in the gray light with his pale skimmed milk eyes, saw a white man standing at the water with a carbine, and for 1/2 second his mind could not make it fit a white man out here with them. And in that 1/2 second where his gun did not know where to point, the scarred man's voice came out of the rocks on his left in flat, clear English, the only English I ever heard him speak. "Ride away." That was all. Ride away. 2 rifles he couldn't see and one he could, and a voice that had killed men before telling him the arithmetic, and Rufus Kell was a coward too. Under it all cruel men so often are. I told you that at the start, and cowards can do a sum. 2 lost horses, a man down, a better gun than his in the rocks. And no scalp worth dying in the Malpais for, not with more coming out of San Carlos every month, easier money on easier ground. He looked at me a long, long time across the water, the way he'd looked at me over my woodpile a lifetime ago. He did not believe I'd fire. He was right. I don't know that I would have. But he could not see the other 2, and they he believed. "You'll hang for this, Renner," he said, flat, giving nothing to the end. "I know it," I said. And he turned his rawbone done, and he and his 2 rode back into the black rock the way they'd come. And the sound of them faded, and the water at the seep went on running quiet in the gray, and nobody died at that water on that morning, and I have been more grateful for that than for almost anything, because I had had enough of the old man's people dying at hidden waters on my account to last me the rest of my life. They left me at the edge of the Malpais, where the black rock gives way to the long grass running up toward the Galliuros, in the first real light of the day. They were going on into country I couldn't follow and shouldn't try to. This was the parting. We all knew it. The woman with the child raised one hand to me, grave, and the young man who'd held a rifle on me all night looked at me for a moment, and then did a small thing, touched his own chest. Once, flat-handed, the gesture, "I am a person, and so, it seems, are you," and turned his horse away. The scarred man was the last but one. He looked down at me from his horse with Nolan sitting before him, and he said, in his rough border Spanish, the last words he ever gave me. The old man laughed at you because you would not put a debt down. Now you have put down everything else to carry it. The ghost of dry humor again, the thing that must have run in that whole family like water in the rock. I do not think it makes you even. I do not think there is such a thing as even. But I think he would laugh again if he saw you standing in your own country with a rifle and a water jug and nothing else, and everything you own back there for the scalp man to burn. He paused. I think he would like that you are so much trouble to yourself. Then it was only Nolan. She had not spoken to me since the yard. Her grandfather's knife was heavy in my coat where I'd put it. Her leg was bound and it would heal now, out there among people who loved her, in country I would never see. She looked down at me from the horse in the new light, and I looked up at her, and neither of us had a single word the other could hold, the same as it had been from the first frozen morning at the tank. And it did not matter. It had never mattered. We had said everything that could be said between us without a shared word in the whole 7 days of it. She touched her chest. Then she reached down, slow, and touched the place over my chest where a dying man's hand had once been laid 11 years before in the desert, where her grandfather's hand had been, and she held it there a moment, flat, warm even through the cold in the coat. And her eyes, when they met mine, were not forgiving. They were never going to be forgiving, and they were something better and harder than forgiving that I have never found the word for. Then she took her hand back, and the scarred man turned the horse, and they rode up into the long grass toward the mountains and the light, and I stood at the edge of the black country and watched them get small, the way I'd watched Kel get small a lifetime ago, and I did not move until they were gone over the roll of the land. Then I sat down on the black rock with the sun warming the back of my neck, and I took out the ledger I'd carried in my coat all night without thinking, and I turned to the back, to the page I'd kept for 11 years. The old man, and under it the blank line and no number. I got out the stub of pencil. I meant to write it settled. I meant finally to close the account. I sat there a long while with the pencil over the blank line. The meadowlarks were starting up in the grass. Somewhere north of me she was riding toward the mountains, healing, home. Behind me 40 miles was a house that would be ashes by now, and a rise with a wooden marker on it that I would never stand beside again. I put the pencil to the line, and I found that I still did not know how to write down what a life is worth, or a grandfather, or a hand laid flat over your heart by someone who has every reason to hate you and lays it there anyway. So I wrote what was true, 3 words, in a hand not as steady as the young one that had written the first 3, 11 years before. Still owed glad. And I closed the book and I stood up and